This was the moment I realized I was really gonna love this game. You get to this point a couple dozen minutes into things. Nothing crazy has happened yet, you're exploring fairly peacefully barring the overall creepy aesthetics of your surroundings, and you walk into a room where these three people are sitting on a table, motionless, their faces stretched, deformed, and decomposing. My first thought was how it looked kind of like a morbid art piece, almost like the beginnings of a haunted wax museum. I started wondering if somebody had set this up like a dollhouse, kind of like those scenes where a kid is having a tea party with their toys, but this time the toys were abhorrent recreations of human beings. Then I started wondering where exactly the clearly deranged owner of these wax figures was at the time, and in what way I was going to eventually see him. And it occurred to me that maybe these weren't wax people at all. They may actually be real corpses. See, I played the original Little Nightmares a few years ago, but from what I remember, the enemies in that game were deformed, but they were also clearly monstrous. I don't remember seeing normal people in that game, and so I guess it never occurred to me that everyone in this universe was some type of twisted, leathery creature. So I started asking myself, how did everyone end up like this? What's happening in this universe? How did these people die upright in their chairs on a dinner table with no sign of distress? Were they maybe still alive and waiting to jump out and scare me, or would I leave this room and have that tingling feeling you get when something behind your back isn't quite right? The feeling that someone's breathing down your neck, the paranoia that behind you is something that shouldn't be there. The incredible thing was not only did I immediately create backstories for every scenario I thought of in quick succession, but I also couldn't tell which scenario was the creepiest if true. There was enough subtlety and depth to let my imagination run wild with theories, and every way I sliced it, this moment, to put it as best as I can, gave me the heebie-jeebies, and it did it all while basically just serving as a quick background of a small room in the beginning of the game. From that point on, I plowed through the rest of the game, and I came to the conclusion that Little Nightmares 2 is a perfect horror experience.
But that wasn't even that scary.
I'm sorry, what was that? Sorry guys, that's Steve, well, he's me, but farther away. Steve, what are you talking about?
Well, you just rambled on forever about how great that section was, but it wasn't even scary. You can just walk through it all without anything jumping out at you. So you're wrong, and you're stupid.
Well, you know what, Steve? You bring up a good point, and you also hurt my feelings, but there's a reason I refer to this game as the perfect horror experience. While things suddenly jumping out at you is definitely a staple in horror, Little Nightmares 2 instead evokes consistent and overhanging horror throughout its full 4 hours, focusing on important elements like tension, mystery, the fear of the unknown, hopelessness, imagery, visual and audio design, and overall universe consistency to create a full experience that continuously horrifies the viewer in more than a one-dimensional interpretation of the word. Look, I'm not a horror aficionado.
Yeah, but you're a virgin aficionado.
Are you 12 years old? Listen, you know what? We're not gonna let Steve interrupt us anymore, so I'm switching gears and we're gonna talk so fast he won't be able to get in a word if he tried. I'm not a horror aficionado, but that's why I was so interested in making this video. Horror is usually a miss for me because it can seem really surface level or overly stretched out or all kinds of things that never really made it my personal cup of tea. I prefer games that incorporate horror as a factor of the game, but not make it the entire game because for me that ends up being just a bit boring. That's why when a title that is predominantly horror really interests me, I think it's worth talking about. So let's talk about it, starting with visual design. When you hear the word stretch, what's the first thing you think of? That thing you never do before exercising? No, bad. Stretch before you exercise, unless you want to be like 45 kicking your phone with you across a shopping mall because you can't bend over to pick it up. Maybe you think of Elastigirl, and honestly, I don't blame you. I think about her on the daily. Wait, where was I going with it? Everything stretches and bends in the universe of Little Nightmares, from the faces and bodies of people to buildings themselves. The city is drenched in this blue hue, our characters hide their faces while the world around them is filled with hideous deformities. Shadows are welcoming until they become your enemy's greatest ally. Everything is gigantic and you are small, and all of this is consistent. I'm excited for the new Resident Evil because it's full sending with a Victorian look, the werewolves, the vampires, the 8-foot-tall witch lady that everyone wants to step on them for some reason. But what's worth noting is that the evil entities in that game are a mix of different horror ideas, original creations, and beings from folklore that have been turned into a hodgepodge of freaky shit, which is cool to see in its own right, but to create a full universe of horror where everything seems in tune with everything else is even better in my opinion, because now instead of it seeming like the game is constantly throwing stuff at you in order to scare you, you just feel like the world you're in is overall a scary place. The consistency mixed with the overall sense of mystery also keeps you engaged. I knew there was something up with the TVs, the eyes, the giant tower in the middle of the city, and the farther I delved into the game, while I never got explicit answers to my questions, everything I saw started to shape an understanding of the overall dynamics of this universe, where some kind of brainwashing or mind control was being implemented to turn viewers into droning, ruined versions of themselves with no free will. Although it seemed that on the fringes of the tower's control, people may have had more agency and tried to hide or remove their disfigurements only to end up worse than they were before. The world that you're in is both your questions and your answers, and because of this, you're constantly engaged with the grotesque elements of the game. The more you understand, the less freaky this place might feel, but the only way to understand is to actively focus on the freakiness. The character designs they came up with within the scope of these interconnected ideas are honestly incredible. Every one of them is gross or ominous or just disturbing. My favorite is probably the school teacher. She's basically stretchy, wrinkly Dolores Umbridge. She's clearly terrifying and strict and overbearing, but she has this creepy ass smile the whole time, like a thinly veiled front for her evilness. The way her neck elongates is so unnatural, and God knows how or why she developed the ability to do that, but I gotta admit, it did make me think that she was probably really good at giving that sloppy toppy guck guck 3000, you know what I'm saying?
I'm sorry, it was Steve. Steve said it.
Sound design. This honestly might be the key to the whole game. In my opinion, every sound or lack of sound is done to perfection. Sonically, most of the game is basically 4 hours of those sections in horror games where it's completely silent and you start hearing a creaking rocking chair and you say nope and you go play Barney's hide and seek for 3 hours instead. You're so tiny in this game that you barely make a sound even when you jump from like 700 feet up. If a floorboard creaks, it's because you set off a trap, not because your weight had any significant effect. When something's pursuing you or there's something terrifying ahead, it's always accompanied by loud, meaty, thick sounds that reinforce how helpless you are. An idea already expressed visually with the framing, the difference in the sizes between you and the enemies, and even the incredible difficulty it takes to use weapons. I'm way more scared for this child who has to put his entire body to barely get a thunk out of a hammer than I am for Resident Evil 7 guy who gets his hand chopped off, vaguely puts alcohol over it, and is totally fine, keeping it one motion. In my video about 1917, I talk about how making the film a one-shot made it feel like you were never safe. You felt like you were being pushed forwards, which not only made it lead to a fast pace, but also a lack of security and the inability to ground yourself. And this game does something very similar. It's not unique in doing this, it's a bit of a staple in this genre, but that doesn't make it any less effective here. You feel your character's exhaustion at the end of this game, and the longer you spend in this world without breaks, the more the feeling of hopelessness is accentuated, ensuring fresh ideas. In one of Donkey's recent videos, he mentions how a hugely impressive and important part of Mario games is how they constantly throw new ideas into the mix and refuse to dwell on them and stretch them out, and instead move right onto another new mechanic. And I think that Little Nightmares 2 does this as well in its own way. Every handful of minutes was a different looking area or section of an area, a new enemy type with completely unique actions, weaknesses, and behaviors, a new puzzle mechanic. It doesn't allow you to fully familiarize yourself with your surroundings and your foes, so you're never in cruise control. Taking from real emotions. I think the best example of this is the school area. 2 different sections in this area have you sneaking around trying to evade the gaze of a school teacher and trying to fight your way out of an insane pack of rabid school children. Both of these sections are extremified versions of real life emotions and situations. Did you ever have that teacher as a kid that was overly strict and made you feel like you couldn't make any noise or ask any questions and you just kind of sat there quietly waiting to get out of there? This game captures that feeling and turns it into a true horror experience. The kids are so still and rigid, the teacher isn't even saying anything, she's just staring at everyone, and later goes around doing that awful thing where she starts looking over people's shoulders and starts judging them. Ugh, I hate that. Silence is only cracked every once in a while by a sharp whipping sound courtesy of Miss Guck Guck, and all of this makes you feel like if you move too fast, the air itself will break and the teacher will know where you are. In the kitchen, kids jump out at you and give you no breathing room. Everything is so loud and frantic, a lot like when a huge group of kids is actually around one another. But it invokes the fear of crowds, of bullies, of claustrophobia, of not being left alone. Once again, nothing here is filled with jump scares or the most sunken, horrific images you've ever seen, but it is filled with tension-inducing emotions, spine-tingling movements and behavior, and an overall sense of feeling like you need to get out of the place that you are. And yet every time you do get out in this game, there's always a new, unwelcoming place ready to drive everything even further. I guess the big thing that I'm trying to get at here is that Little Nightmares 2 is a great horror game because every fiber of it expands and adds dimensions to its overall horror. There isn't really one part of the game that I can point to and say, oh wow, that part was so scary. Like, for example, the freaky ghost popping out at you after you open that one door in Until Dawn, but I think that's actually a good thing because that often leads to more shallow horror stuff that I'm not the biggest fan of personally. I'm not saying that stuff is bad or that the people who enjoy it just aren't as sophisticated as I am, just that I prefer elements like atmosphere evoking the feeling of uneasiness and the idea of feeling helpless and trapped over pure, sudden jolts of horror. And I think that Little Nightmares 1 and 2 have those qualities in spades. I'd recommend if you play it to play it from start to finish in one go if you can, clear out like 4 hours, close the lights, put on headphones, and allow yourself to get invested in the moment. If you're anything like me, you really won't regret it. Okay, nice. Another video down. Look at me, Mr. Consistent over here. If this is the first video you guys are watching of mine, make sure to subscribe because I'm planning on keeping up this consistency and talking about a whole bunch of games, movies, and shows, basically talking everyone's ears off. So if that sounds good to you, subscribing will make sure you're here for the next time I do it. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and comment because that helps a lot with the videos, and it also helps me know which videos people like and what I should work on. So anyways, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.